welcoming the inclusion of the Greens and the Social Democrats in a united government. Considering how well Sinn Féin did in the election, which seems like years ago now at this stage, to be honest, because so much has happened since then, I mean, how does that make you feel?
Well, firstly, I agree with you, Niall, that this isn't a time for a political bun fight or for political point scoring. I'm disappointed that even in the grip of a pandemic and a national crisis, the likes of which you and I haven't seen in our lifetime, that Leo Varadkar still feels the need to practice the politics of exclusion. Now, the reality is, and anybody with an ounce of common sense would understand, that you can't actually have a national unity government without Sinn Féin. It
kind of goes against the word unity then, doesn't it, really?
Of course. Well, it goes against both concepts. So, I mean, more than 25% of people came out and voted for us. We have a very strong mandate. We have a big job to do. We have a lot to contribute. We are anxious and eager to roll up our sleeves and to do the right things and to make sure also that the right things are done, because in the here and now, this is about, as the doctor that you were listening to on your journey down, this is about preventing people getting sick. This is about preventing our health service being completely overwhelmed. This is about preventing people dying unnecessarily. This is about supporting families and people who have lost their jobs and more who lose their jobs, and people whose businesses now will have to close. We've a huge lift to make here. So
let's get to one or two of those things on this.
From Varadkar is very disappointing.
And mind you, I know you applauded him on his speech, and it was a very well put together speech. Although there were quite a lot of cliches in it, but however, it was a well put together speech, and I know you applauded him on that. And you want to cooperate. I think at a time like this, we have to leave the politics at the front door, and we all need to cooperate. And you are right that the population spoke during the election, and without a shadow of a doubt, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin more or less had the same votes, the same amount of votes. So it's clear that the country wants a combination of everybody's policies, in other words, and that includes Sinn Féin.
Of course, and look, come here, at the end of the day, I think Leo Varadkar and everybody else needs to remember that what matters here now is the people, not political egos, and not people sticking out their chest in that way. I would just make this observation, Niall, and I had said it during the course of the election. I mean, the big two, as they were, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, have had power here for almost a century, and they're not willing to let go and to let others in. And for me, unfortunately, Leo's remarks just demonstrate that fact again, even as we face into a terrifying pandemic, that he still continues with that rhetoric is extraordinary, and he shouldn't be at that. And I'd ask him to stop and to allow everybody to work together in the common good.
And I can't see why that should even be an issue, even if it's on a temporary basis. Even on a temporary basis, listen, we can deal with the election. We can even have another election if they want to in 6 months' time or a year's time, when we all see the light at the end of the tunnel and get through this. But getting down to what we need to do right now, we've two aspects of this. We've the health aspect of it, and obviously that's paramount, that everybody and as many people survive this as possible, and as many people stay safe and healthy as possible. And then you have the financial aspect of it, and what it's going to cost the state, and how we invest in the future. Because without a shadow of a doubt, we're looking at a recession. So how we invest in that recession to make it easy, so we don't go through another 9 years as we did between 2009 and 2019. So Regina Doherty has clearly said that €203 is not enough. I know Pierce Doherty is suggesting 70% of salary should be paid, similar to, I suppose, the United Kingdom, and Boris saying 80% of salaries up to €2,500. Is that a line that you would be thinking of going down? Is that what the government should be doing?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people in circumstances that they could never have predicted, overnight they lost their job. And Niall, and I know what that means for a worker and for their family. I mean, you're in many ways your world falls apart. Mm-hmm. So people have lost their jobs. Be very clear that more people are going to lose their jobs. Businesses that, if without this virus would be viable, thriving businesses, are going to have to shut their doors.
Some may reopen and some may not.
Well, here's my point. So therefore, we need to intervene in this in a way that is, or at least would have been unthinkable for some 5 or 6 weeks ago. So what we are saying is that people's incomes need to be protected. I'm very glad that there seems to be a consensus emerging on this point. We have different ways or suggestions as to how you do it. Our suggestion, for example, is that every worker, your first €32,500 of income, that is secured. Now, for lots of people, that's their entire income. For others, it might even be a little bit more above what they actually earn. But we're saying that portion of income must be protected. If you're fortunate enough to earn more than that, well, then your employer can top you up. But at a minimum, that you would be guaranteed up to €565 a week.
I'm assuming you're suggesting not paying this to people, as currently the COVID payment is being paid directly to people. And to be honest with you, without being cynical, that's open to fraud, because it's open to people claiming who shouldn't probably get it, etc., etc. I'm assuming we're saying that if we're going to go down this route of protecting income to the point of paying a percentage of income, that we pay this to the employer, who will then keep the staff on the books based on, say, their last month's pay, that you work it out that way. In other words, that the employer, if he reopens again in, say, 8 months or 6 months or 3 months or whenever this all stops, that he can then say to all his staff, right, I'll come back to work now, so his business is being protected. I'm assuming.
Well, yeah. The objective is that this would be payable through the employer. It's actually nothing got to do with fraud, but it has everything to do with, rather than allowing businesses go bust and close down, that you actually put businesses, you suspend them, you put them to sleep for the next number of weeks or months. So when this crisis passes, and it will, as sure as night follows day, we will come out the far end of this. And when we do, to ensure that businesses can kickstart very, very quickly and start putting the economy and their business models back together, and bringing people back to work immediately. You see, the problem is...
Well, Mary, have you been disappointed? If I can ask you, because I know Pascal was on the Late Late Show the other night, and I thought that was a very disappointing interview, to be honest with you. I thought he didn't really answer any questions, and I think at one stage Ryan put the same question to him 3 times in relation to the British model, and he avoided answering it every single time, although Regina did say in RT the following morning that she believed the €203 was not enough. To bail out the state, we worked it out based on the British model, for example, at 500,000 people maximum over 6 months. And that's working it out. It wouldn't be any more than 500,000 people. Would cost a maximum of €7.5 billion. Now, when we consider we paid $64 billion to bail out the banks, I don't think that's a bad investment in the future.
Well, can I tell you now, it's an absolutely essential investment. It's the smartest, wisest money that we will spend as a society at this time. Because you're right, a decade ago, the banks went bust, the financial crisis hit, and they were bailed out to the tune of $64 billion. And not alone that, the austerity, the cutbacks, the hardship that followed, many, many people still bear the scars of that. This crisis has to be about now the government, the state, and all of its agencies standing up and bailing out families, workers, and communities to ensure that when we come out of this crisis, firstly, alive, with our health intact, that's the first thing. But secondly, that we are in the best position possible to start rebuilding the economy, rebuilding our public services in ways, let me say, that will have to be very, very different from the kind of politics and the kind of decisions that we've had in the past. But
because we got to think outside the box. This is not something this is completely unprecedented, uncharted waters. In relation to business too, you know, there's people texting in at the moment saying, what about the self-employed? I'm assuming self-employed should be treated the same way.
Yes, the self-employed. I mean, one of the flaws with the British model that you referred to, and we're dealing with this because obviously it has an effect in the north, is that it doesn't include the self-employed. Certainly the proposal that we in Sinn Féin are pressing for the government here to adopt absolutely has to cover the self-employed.
Well, easy enough. I think all you'd have to do is, all you would do is base it on the previous year's tax return.
Absolutely. No, look, come here, revenue know exactly what everyone has. Be very sure, be very, very sure of that. So it should
include self-employed. And I'm sorry for rushing it, but I want to try and get as much information as possible.
Sure,
and also in relation to revenue, Businesses are talking about, say, the revenue commissioners. At the moment, they've said that there'll be no penalties and fines, but they're still kind of looking for their money. Would there not be a suggestion there that they say for the next 2 VAT periods, one which is due at the end of this month, the next 2 VAT periods, that they will give a VAT refund to try and sustain business and try and give a little bit of capital behind business for reopening?
Yeah, I think all of those measures need to be looked at. The issue of rates holidays, the whole lot needs to be looked at in an extraordinary way, because the objective here, and let me repeat it, is to ensure that workers can put the light on, put bread on the table, can get through in a material sense this crisis, but also that we have businesses that we can reopen when this crisis passes. So, Niall, in our view, everything needs to be on the table, everything needs to be considered. We need to think creatively and outside of the box to meet all of the challenges that we're now going to face. And let me say, small and medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood of the Irish economy right across the island. So in particular for small businesses, for medium-sized enterprises, the state now needs to pull out all of the stops.
Absolutely, because the larger companies can absorb this.
Oh, of course. Huge big corporates are a different kettle of fish.
Okay. In relation to the decisions that have already been made, there was a big deal made by Pascal about the 3-month holiday, or the moratorium, essentially, was what it is. It doesn't really help people, because when it happens and people get it from their, they still have to go through the process of providing a financial statement, etc., they still have to pay it back. So it's going to be recapitalised or added on to the end of their mortgage. So it's not really a holiday. It's still costing people money. Is that acceptable? Is it good enough? Should the banks have just not said, listen, let's just suspend mortgages until a particular date that we decide, or we all come together and decide on a particular date when we all start paying again?
Well, the short answer is that the banks are being let off the hook by Pascal and by the government as a whole. What they have proposed, this 3-month holiday, is something that even in the ordinary course of events you can approach your bank and you can look for. What they're suggesting is a 3-month holiday, but that your interest payments would still accrue. So you're still building up additional debt. What needs to happen is a mortgage freeze. And I'm not convinced at all that a period of 3 months will be sufficient.
No, it won't.
I think we're going to have to look at them.
They say the legislation only allows them to go 3 months, because after that you essentially become a bad debt.
Yes, so that's according to the central bank and the application of rules. But they also said that they had to stick to that position unless and until the government said otherwise, which is interesting, because very often when we've been looking for them to do things, or the government to do things, they say, well, we can't interfere in that. Anyway, this is not a time for messing or for dancing on the head of the pin. We have to be absolutely sure that everybody can keep a roof over their head throughout this crisis, that nobody is forced into a default on their mortgage. And we have to be sure also, when we come out the far end of this, that people haven't been forced.
Yes.
Massive personal debt, absolutely. So the banks thus far have not in any way been pressurised to participate and to carry their fair share of the load in this crisis. So that has to change. My colleague Pierce Doherty has been talking to the banks. He'll be continuing that conversation. I'm only sorry he's not the Minister for Finance, to be absolutely honest with you, because certainly big pressure will have to be put on the banks and on the insurance companies, because you probably know that many businesses are reporting that despite having a business disruption, a disruptive
Of course, the technicalities, the insurance are not paying out because of the way things are worded, and because of the legislation is not demanding that businesses are closing, although that may change now. But of course, I know that Sinn Féin actually have said it as well in relation to this particular thing, that the insurance companies need to get together, or the government need to get together with insurance companies and say, listen, you need to relax on the wording of your insurance.
But here's the other thing. Well, that's true, but here is the other thing. You see, in the absence of the state, of the government saying out loud, we are now moving to, I don't like the term lockdown, I prefer shutdown or suspension. We are now moving to full emergency measures, and all non-essential businesses now must be suspended. I think that's what needs to happen at this point in time.
Do you think we're at that point, Mary Lou, now?
Absolutely.
I mean, look, it is important that we slow down this. And look, We can't stop it, obviously, we know that. But it's important for the health service that we slow it down to ease the pressure. Otherwise, that reality, that doctor I listened to this morning, that reality comes true where we start going down a triage route where sadly people will die unnecessarily because our health service won't be able to obviously sustain the amount of people that we've coming in. And I know that doesn't look like that now from people because they're hearing, oh, 4 people died, and that's really sad. And my condolences to all their friends and family. And we say, I'm sure it's only 4 and there's only so many people sick. But that's only now. This is going to landslide in about 2 weeks' time or a week's time, possibly.
Yeah, and if we don't act now, if we delay, I would invite people not to look across the island of Ireland, but look at Italy and ask yourselves, is that really where we want to go? That is not where we want to go. Let me tell you why I'm so concerned and why I'm now absolutely
Are you worried
convinced.
Personally, Mary?
I'm worried for my own
because
family.
I know you went into isolation yourself at the very start when I know your children were in the school.
They were. They had to be quiet. But everyone here, thank God, touch wood, is well. I'm concerned for everyone. I tell you what I'm really concerned for. I'm concerned for people who have done everything by the book over last weekend, kept away from their mammies for Mammy's Day, did all of the physical distancing, all of that stuff, and who today go back into work onto construction sites and factories and call centres, places where you cannot physically distance. Those workers who know that they are taking a risk, that they are being put at risk, the risk that they might bring the virus back home to their families. I think that is outrageous. I think it's unacceptable. And I think now is the moment for leadership and for all of us, but led by the government, to say, right, from now, non-essential business is suspended. Because there's no sense in giving out to people for being on top of each other on Bettystown Beach or over in Hope, which of course it's stupid and should not be happening. But the mixed messages that are being sent out are letting people off the hook. It's a mixed message.
Well, I mean, sadly, Mary, a lot of people have treated this, and maybe we'll all start to cop on now. But a lot of people treated this weekend gone by as a bank holiday weekend, as time off to go away. And I heard a councillor in Donegal giving out about the amount of visitors they got over the weekend. I heard people on the Aran Island saying, please stop coming over to us. It's not a holiday. You know, stop treating it like a holiday, because, of course, they have an elderly population on the island. And a lot of people, the same in the UK, they're heading off to the Cotswolds and they're heading off to all these wonderful places for the weekend because they have time off work. And people shouldn't be treating this as a holiday. But you talk about essential services, and we've tried desperately to get Richard Bruton on the air. We can't get him on the air for some reason. We've had numerous emails ignored and phone calls. From a selfish point of view, Leo Varadkar mentioned the media and journalists and the important role they're playing in this. I mean, you should be well aware that radio stations, the independent radio sector, not RTE, of course, who have a comfortable cushion of a television licence, we depend on advertising. Most radio stations in the independent sector in this country have probably lost about 70% of their advertising in the last 7 days. Because we rely on hospitality, the gigs from Ticketmaster, the holiday companies, all those places are not advertising. We have, and we will have, no money going forward unless the state intervenes. We will have no independent radio in this country in the next month or so. They'll all start shutting the doors unless the government intervenes. What should be done for the independent sector? And that's a very selfish question for me to ask you, but obviously... No,
can I tell you, it's not one bit selfish, because the reality is that we're saying to people, stay at home. And by the way, this is a deadly virus. We have no immunity and we have no vaccine. So this isn't just some light flu. This is a killer virus. And stay at home means stay at home. By all means, get out, stretch your legs, get the fresh air into your lungs. But use your cop on, for goodness sake. Go at times where places are quiet. If somewhere is packed, go home. So that's the first thing. But when we say to people, stay at home, people are going to want information from reliable sources. People are going to want to hear what's happening. They need their news reported. They also need diversion and conversation.
And local stories too.
And a bit of fun and local stories, because we're Irish, for God's sake. We rely on crack and good conversation and keeping in touch. So I actually think that radio in particular is a really, really important and essential service through this emergency. So we suggested, for example, last week that the you know, all of it, there's quite a substantial budget, obviously, for communications and advertising, even in relation to this virus itself.
Well, I could suggest something to you right now, Mary,
Yeah.
and the CEOs of many of the radio stations have suggested it already to the Broadcasting Authority. Now, Richard Bruton, the best he could do was abolishing the levy, suspending the levy for 6 months to the Broadcasting Authority. That amounts to about €25,000 per radio station. That's not even going to cover half the salary for most radio stations.
Yeah.
But what we suggested was, at the moment, there's a Sound and Vision grant, which is €15 million, which is given out by the Broadcasting Authority every year to independent sectors to produce, small programmes and documentaries. That should be suspended for a year. The 15 million then divvied out appropriately to each radio station or television station in the case of Virgin Media, and that money should be given out appropriately to the radio stations so they can survive this.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of innovations like that we need, but I also think that the advertising revenue that has been foregone because businesses are under so much pressure and because the economy at some stage is going to be put to sleep, and I think it needs to happen now. I think there's no room for delay. I think government revenue in terms of advertising and spending, I think can be targeted also to independent outlets and to local radio stations. So we're in a whole new world now, Niall, and things that people took very much for granted 2 months ago are now things of absolutely critical importance so that we can help ourselves as families, as individuals and communities to get through this in the very best shape that we can.
And I think the message out to people, what we want and what government's job in this situation is we want everybody to be obedient, if that's the right word to use without being too patronising. We want everyone to comply because it's in everyone's interest and everyone's health that we all do that. And to do that, we need to put people in a secure position and a safe position financially to be able to do that. So Johnny or Mary doesn't have to worry, well, if I stay at home, I'll have no money for food or mortgages or rent or whatever it is. So we have to put them in a position where they want to comply.
Exactly. We have to make it possible for people to carry out the responsible behaviours. So that means that, for example, renters need to be looked after. We need to cut rents and we need to freeze them. We have to be sure that nobody loses the roof over their head, that there is an absolute moratorium on evictions, and we discussed the mortgage piece as well.
And by the way, just to say that, because I don't want to make the landlords out to be bad people, because they're not. Most of them are good people. So the landlords also have to be compensated in a way, because that's a loss of earnings for them too. So everybody has to be looked at.
This is about just being fair all around. It's also about being clear. So there's no point in criticising younger people if they're not keeping their distance and they're not observing what we need them to do to keep people alive at the weekend. If you're saying to them, but come Monday morning, go back to work on your building site or go back into the factory. So we have to, if we're serious about this and we have no option but to be serious about it, all of us need to be serious. And I firmly believe that political leaders and government need to lead from the front on this. Just before I came on to talk to you, Niall, I got word from a construction site, which I won't name, but it's a large construction site. There's several hundred workers on it, and there is only one source of warm water and soap. There's no hand sanitizers. There's no protective measures being taken. Those workers are terrified. Their families at home are even more worried. That is not acceptable, and that needs to stop, and that means we need decisive action. Now, we need a little bit of common sense and common decency now to be the order of the day.
All right, well, listen, I thank you very much indeed. There are a lot of questions that I could ask you. People are asking, I have somebody that texted in here, they're a school teacher, obviously, and they're concerned that their students online are worried about the junior cert and leaving cert.
Yeah.
And I suppose for everybody, they're going to fill out their CEOs and a CSO, and they want to know exactly what they're going to be doing. Are they going to be going to college? Will they get now, I know the orals and the projects will be 100% automatically. But what's going to happen to the written exam? If that's cancelled, how can they go to college next year? All these questions. And I know you don't have all the answers. I know you don't.
No, I don't, but I do have teenage kids, right? And as you said earlier on, they have done 2 weeks quarantine and then the schools shut down. Now, fortunately, we don't have exams this year, any big exam. But can we just say to those families and to the students, the system is going to have to adapt now to the completely extraordinary circumstances that we're in. So here's the best advice that you're going to get, I think. Keep tipping along day to day. Keep your hand in. Keep the books open. Keep doing your work. Follow the assignments and the advice that's coming from your teachers and from your school. This is not a holiday. You are not on your summer holidays, so don't kick back. Keep working, have routine, set yourself a timetable, work as though you will have exams come the summertime, certainly Leaving Cert students. But if the exams can't happen and if we have to reshape things, that is what we will do. Students won't be punished, but keep your hand in, keep at your books, keep studying hard, and actually take advantage of the fact that you have to keep your physical distance to actually get a real sense of structure and routine for yourself. And don't stress. The government and the Department of Education and all of us in leadership positions have got to ensure that this very difficult situation is managed in terms of exams and CSO and all of that. The system is going to have to respond to this crisis.
And loads of texts, by the way, coming in. I could read them all out about people working in Plus who are working in warehouses. My son works Plus in a warehouse. Somebody else says, I'm a meter reader and I'm still working and obviously concerned. Other factories are texting in here saying that they're open. Listen, Mary Lou, thank you very much. On a final note, my last selfish point as well. I expect you to raise the point of independent radio, because that's obviously my task here to make sure that we get looked after as well, because everybody obviously wants to get looked after. And I would remind you to ask them that the Sound and Vision grant is available, should be suspended. And also, by the way, RTE, because there is no live outdoor events at the moment, there's no sports, they're saving quite a substantial amount of money. Maybe that part of the television licence could be appropriated to the independent sector. We're not looking for something for nothing, we're just looking to survive.
Okay, no, I hear you.
All right, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
There you go, Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou MacDonald.